Imagine a vast desert, scorched by the sun. This was the land of ancient Egypt, but through this desert flowed a lifeline, the Nile River. The Egyptians called it Ar, meaning black. This name came from the rich dark silt the river carried. The Nile was more than just water. It was the very source of life. Without the Nile, Egypt would have been just another desert. But the river brought life. It brought water for drinking and for growing crops. The Nile was a gift. Every year, it would flood. These floods weren't destructive like most floods. Instead, they were a blessing. They brought with them the fertile silt from the heart of Africa. This silt was like magic. It transformed the dry desert land into rich farmland. The Nile was the heart of ancient Egypt. It was their lifeline, their provider, and their connection to the world. The annual flooding of the Nile was a time of celebration. The Egyptians knew that with the flood came life. The flood waters would spread across the land, leaving behind a layer of fertile silt. This silt was rich in nutrients. It was these nutrients that allowed the Egyptians to grow an abundance of crops. The Egyptians were skilled farmers. They developed a system called basin irrigation. They built mud walls to divide their fields into large basins. When the flood came, they trapped the water in these basins. This allowed the water to soak into the soil, making it ideal for planting. To measure the height of the flood, the Egyptians created nilometers. These were tall, marked stones placed inside special wells connected to the Nile. By looking at the water level on the nilometer, they could predict how good the harvest would be. A high flood meant a good harvest. The Egyptians were grateful for the Nile's gift. They worshipped a god of the Nile called Hapi. Hapi was a god of fertility and abundance. He was depicted as a man with blue or green skin, representing the life-giving waters of the Nile. The Nile was not just a source of food for the Egyptians, it was also their highway. The river flowed like a long road from north to south, connecting the entire kingdom. The Egyptians built boats to travel up and down the Nile. They built large, sturdy boats from wood. These boats had sails to catch the wind. They used these boats to transport goods and people over long distances. They also built smaller boats called skiffs from papyrus reeds. These boats were lightweight and easy to maneuver. They were perfect for fishing and short trips. The Nile allowed the Egyptians to trade with other civilizations. They traded goods like gold, grain, and papyrus for cedar wood, ivory, and exotic animals. This trade helped the Egyptians to prosper and grow their civilization. The Nile was the artery of ancient Egypt. It pumped life and prosperity into the kingdom. It connected the people, their goods, and their ideas. The Nile was more than just a river to the ancient Egyptians. It was the very foundation upon which their civilization was built. It was their provider, their protector, and their inspiration. They depended on it for life, for food, for transportation, and for trade. The Nile influenced every aspect of their lives. Their calendar was based on the Nile's floods. Their gods and goddesses were often associated with the river. Their art and architecture were inspired by the Nile's beauty and power. The ancient Egyptians understood that their survival depended on the Nile. They revered it, respected it, and lived in harmony with its rhythms. The Nile, in return, nurtured their civilization, allowing it to flourish for thousands of years. The legacy of the Nile lives on today. The river still flows through the heart of Egypt, a constant reminder of its vital role in shaping one of the greatest civilizations in human history.